Wow, graveyard shift, and I've got a room that's 3/4 full. That's amazing. Thank you. My presentation this afternoon is a little bit schizophrenic, and I'll come to that later on. The title is Energy from Waste, What's Possible and Why Is It Necessary? And that's what we're going to be talking about, but there is another theme which I'll introduce in a few minutes. Let's take a deep breath. Let's pause. Why are we doing all this? The whole reason for worrying about any of this stuff is that waste management is changing. We've got an increased focus over the last, 20, 30 years on resource efficiency, and now we're hearing a lot today, a lot in this conference, about the circular economy. We're trying to move to reuse all that stuff, not put it into landfills. The key drivers behind all of that have been the human health considerations and the environmental sustainability of what we're doing. This is what's really been pushing waste management all the way along, and it's becoming more and more apparent, more and more necessary today than it was in the past. We heard a lot about that today. We're running out of, the world potentially will run out of resources. We can't sustain the lifestyle that we've all become so beautifully accustomed to. We have to apply the waste hierarchy and life cycle thinking in our waste solutions. And we need to have jurisdictional frameworks which work together. We heard from Mike Ritchie earlier today and the discussion this morning about the jurisdictions working in harmony. Bringing it together, we can achieve a lot more if we could only get our act together and work as one nation on all this stuff. Consider all the stakeholders in delivering a more strategic approach to waste management. Consider the industry, the community, and also the not-for-profit sector. They're all important in trying to deliver what we're trying to do. The need for action, as I said, is the protection of human health, protection of the environment, resource conservation, meeting community expectations, and not the least of which is we've got a dwindling landfill capacity. Who wants to set up a new landfill, especially in the Sydney Basin? Any takers in the room? Anyone got deep pockets? Lots of patience? There's lots of holes. No difficulty finding holes in the ground, but there's nowhere it's going to be very difficult to get something else up and running. We have to do something. If you think about it, our entire industrial output and imports, the entire lot is destined for landfill unless there's some sort of intervention. A newspaper, yeah, that'll be in a day. A brick might take 100 years, but in the end, unless there's some sort of intervention, some effort, it's all going to go to landfill. And we don't want what's on that picture on the right. I won't name where that is, but it's a mess. And it is, it's the sort of thing that all the stuff that we're doing, all the stuff that these conferences are about, is aimed at avoiding. Government responses have been through waste levies, financial incentives, setting targets. I'm going to dwell on targets again in a minute. Extended producer responsibility and tighter regulation. It's not going to get any lighter. That's a repeat of a graph that you saw earlier that Mike Ritchie may have seen earlier that Mike Ritchie put up. Landfill levies are there to stay. They are increasing. Yes, we can talk about Queensland, but they have started from a very low base and they're going up and they're going to get more and more and more. And that's good, I believe, because it drives the resource recovery sector. It makes the alternative to landfill an economically viable proposition. But what about targets? State-based waste diversion targets are, not to put too fine a point on it, a little bit all over the shop, and I'm not quite sure what they've been based on. New South Wales, we've got a new target. We had one a couple of years ago that was released. By 21-22, we're going to have 70% diversion of MSW, 70% of C&I, 80% of C&D. That's great. Sounds good. It's very aspirational. Victoria doesn't talk about it. They just have a general resource recovery vision, which is also good. But what are we trying to achieve? WA, 65% in the metro area, but if you're outside the metro area, it's only 50% for MSW, 70 and 75 for C&I, C&D respectively. South Australia, 70, 80, 80, unless you're in outside the metropolitan area, in which case just please do your best. Queensland, at the moment, it's 50, 55, 80. Tasmania doesn't worry about it. The ACT is the highest target one, if you like, more than 87% on MSW, 80 and 90% for C&D. And in the Northern Territory, we're just going to reduce all waste to disposal by 50% compared to 2009. Not sure how they're going to measure that, but that's what we're going to do. My point with all this is there doesn't seem to be any consistency, there's no logic in it, and there's really mixed achievement. I'm not too critical because those targets are aspirational. But the central question is, and coming back to the theme of what I'm meant to be talking about, what's real and how on earth would you get there? How can that really be achieved? Okay, this is where the schizophrenia comes out. I'm going to talk about a hypothetical jurisdiction. It isn't a hypothetical jurisdiction. When I prepared the abstract for this conference, Greg, I wanted to talk about some work that we'd done, but I couldn't because it was under embargo. It has since been come off, and the hypothetical jurisdiction, I'm very pleased to say, is actually the ACT. We did a waste roadmap, if you like, on how they'd get from their very good performance today to try and achieve those really high aspirational targets. 90% is a big call. How on earth would you do it, especially coming from a relatively high base when you compare it to the rest of the country? So our hypothetical ACT has very good solid waste management performance. I don't think there's any dispute on that they're probably leading it in the country, but it's plateaued. They're not really getting any better in recent years, and the task that is there is how on earth would you improve it? Find a pathway to achieve that target, and most importantly, that pathway has to be practical, affordable, and it's got to be acceptable to the community. Otherwise, it isn't going to get off the ground. This is what they're doing. 70% on overall landfill diversion. It's pretty good. If you look at it by the waste streams, 58% for MSW, 58% for CNI, 86% for C&D. A lot of recycling. There's a lot more that can be done, though, to get that little bit up, but how would you achieve it? This is where it gets a little bit more interesting. The performance by the particular waste types. What we're focusing on is all that stuff in green, all the little things down the bottom. It's not the low-hanging fruit. This is the stuff at the top of the tree. How on earth can you try and attack that and divert it and still have a system that makes sense according to the criteria that I mentioned earlier? Okay, we looked at it. We try to understand what would be achievable and how and what, just thought bubble the whole process. Just take those residual components and analyse them and what could you do with them in an ideal world. And if we focused on the materials that you are going to recover from the waste stream, just focus on what you can get out. Starting at 70%, a container deposit scheme, great news for the front page of the paper. Everybody likes a CDS, it raises community awareness, it'll give a little bit towards achieving that target. Reducing food waste, that's a big deal, it's very much the talk of the town, but again, it's just going to give a little incremental amount, doesn't matter, put it there, because it's also good for community expectations, community understanding and motivation. Enhanced recycling, the CNI waste that is being produced, and the MSW for that matter, let's see if we can't get more out of it. It might mean a dirty MRF, goodness knows what, there's more metals in there that can come out. Let's see what we can do. That will yield product if it's processed correctly. Glass recycling, glass is a saga in Australia right now, we've heard about that before in this conference. But let's take that glass and let's go and do something with it, turn it into sand, use it in civil construction. Repair and dismantle, again, it's nibbling at the edges, but it contributes a little bit, it all helps. All the timber that's around, convert it into wood chip. That wood chip finds multiple uses. Crushing inert waste, the rocks and stuff that are left over, add that to the C&D stream. Gypsum recovery is a possibility. Composting starts to add a little bit to it. And with the stuff that's left over, process engineered fuel. It's got a calorific value. Why not get the energy out of it? Purposely went process engineered fuel because there isn't the mass there isn't the volume of waste that would justify a purpose-built purpose-built incinerator or something, or an energy from waste facility. That's a materials focus. Let's take a different approach. Let's put the maximum amount that we can into the soil. Again, container deposit, that'll take a little bit out. Enhanced recycling, that does its bit. Glass recycling, repairing, dismantling, gypsum recovery, crushing and earth waste. Composting now, we're not going to be doing anything with wood. We're going to be composting and we're going to be making biochar. And what's left over is going to go into process engineered fuel. I take it everyone in the room has heard about biochar. I'm a believer in the stuff. The reality is it doesn't have a market at present. But it's a great idea. One day it might have a market. Hold that thought. If we're just looking at the soils focus, these are the possibilities. It's a menu. Now, energy focus. What on earth can we do if we just worried solely about energy? Don't worry about the materials recovery, or don't worry so much about the materials recovery. Let's maximise what we get from energy. Again, container deposits, glass recycling, crush the inerts. That takes care of all the hard stuff you can't do much with. Anaerobic digestion, and then waste to energy. Process engineered fuel or whatever. You can do a lot more. You'll notice that all of those take us up to just under 90%, about 87%. So the message there is that if you're going after the high-hanging fruit, you're only going to get to just under that 90% aspirational target. That's putting a bit of reality on it. Now, how do we assess all this? These are all great ideas. They're wonderful thought bubbles. The coffee pot's nearly empty. What the hell are we going to do with all this information? We evaluated the three pathways using different criteria, which were to focus on the significant streams in the waste that yielded tangible results. In other words, don't worry so much about the plastic bags, but do worry about the organics. Do worry about what can be composted. Do worry about what could eventually be burnt. Only worry about established technology that's simple to implement and operate, not the blue sky stuff. There's lots and lots of other options that are coming out. They haven't been tested, they haven't been proven. It's great to give those technologies an opportunity, but meanwhile we've got waste coming in the front gate. We've got to deal with it. And there's no time, there's no opportunity to let it pile up while some scientist or developer says, oh yes, I know what's wrong, give me another $10 million in 12 months and I'll fix it. We're going to have a great big pile to worry about. We need an efficient and convenient waste collection system. You've got to get the materials to the plant, you've got to get the materials to the different sub-plants that are doing all this processing. Minimise the costs. And above all, there's got to be potential markets for the products. We keep losing, well, not we don't, but a lot of people keep losing sight of that really basic fact. The best ideas in the world are great, but if you can't sell the product, if you can't sell the product at a price that the market will pay, it just isn't going to happen. Consider the synergy between the different options that are on the table, their innovation potential, and of course their risk. You can't get away from it. There's opportunities for innovation in all of this. With the wood chip, which you saw earlier, in the materials and the soil one, we were making wood chip. You could also take that further, having got your wood chip, into particle board or biochar if the biochar market became available. In other words, the synergy opportunity means that the thing is not static. There's going to be a dynamicism in it. And it might change over time, and you can redirect the resources to different directions when the opportunity arises, and it makes sense. Plastics can go into process engineered fuel, that's obvious, but they could also go into local plastic manufacture, repelletise the stuff. If a plant gets set up, if somebody can, and it's the subject of conversation today with China, if that can be achieved, why not do it? It doesn't have to go into fuel. The dirty stuff that you can't clean up, the stuff that's too mixed, yeah, put it into fuel. It doesn't all have to go there though. Glass, sand replacement, heard enough about that here. And of course, water filtration media is another possibility. Food waste can go into composting. It can also go into anaerobic digestion, biochar again. We can also get really crazy and put it into larvae culture. where you're feeding insects which become animal food. There are a couple of companies that I know of one that's touting that idea. It hasn't become commercial yet, but it is a possibility for the future. Anything that's done here doesn't have to preclude that in the future. Okay, I'll hurry. Gypsum, soil amendment, also could go back into new plasterboard. Waste diversion risks, got to worry about the contamination, got to worry about the acceptance of your product, the volatility of the market, how good is your technology, and of course education requirements, and worry about also the products that are being displaced. With the markets, the roadmap depends on the markets being developed for the products being generated. Each one had to be considered on the basis of its maturity, its supply relative to the capacity to supply it, the price relative to the cost, in other words, can you sell the stuff, and the risks, as I said earlier. Worry about the disruptors. The waste is continually being produced, as I mentioned, so the markets for the products need to be sustained. China comes into the equation, and disruptions to the markets leads to stockpiling and reduced prices. We don't want that to happen. We set up a hierarchy of decision making, deal with the waste types that make up a large proportion of the landfill waste, use technology that's simple to develop and operate in the short term, collect waste in a way that is efficient and convenient, low-cost approach, processing less value waste, processing cost less the value of the saleable products, and seek strong potential markets for the recycled product. That was how we set up the final. Won't worry about that in the interest of time. The final optimum solution, and you'll find that waterfall chart published in the ACT's waste roadmap, which is available on the web. The mix there is practical. We believe it's practical. I hope the community agrees. It isn't locked in concrete. It's possible to be dynamic and swap and change as other ideas come along. But coming back now to the first theme, energy from waste, why do we need it and what's it going to do? In order to achieve that 90, or get as close as possible to the 90%, you've got to have an energy component in your overall approach. And there's a large chunk there that's dedicated to process engineered fuel manufacture. Things to worry about? How am I doing for time? We're finished? Okay. Look it up later on. Worry about all those things that I've got there. The two I really just want to highlight is the need for the levy and to worry about the arbitrage of waste. Don't let it go across the border. In the ACT, you've got Woodlawn sitting around the corner. Right, the ACT government, for any of this to work, needs to be able to ensure that waste won't leak across into New South Wales. We're the bad guys this time round. Waste won't leak across the border into a cheaper landfill. And the way to do that, I believe, would be to have the levy go with the waste. Very simple. So, what does success look like? They'll be putting up a composting facility for FOGO. Wood chip facility for animal bedding possibly, process engineered fuel facility, only employing well-proven technology. FOGO bin in residences, integrating commercial waste collection services, possibly and hopefully. Government will be an active part of the recycling sector through procuring these practices. Contracts have been in place for the purchase of recycled products, and construction contract specifications be written around recycled product. This is nirvana. If we can achieve it, it will make the ACT a leader. Regulation is going to have to be considered, be a light touch, work with industry, because industry and the government are going to be partners in achieving this. As I mentioned earlier, the waste levy would be attached to the waste, and review existing regulations to make sure that nothing's being obstructive. There are lots of opportunities. Most importantly, to just fly through to the end, it should end up with an 80% landfill diversion culture, a diversion amount, and most importantly, it demonstrates resource recovery working together with energy from waste. And that's a very strong message that we, I believe, as an industry should be conveying to the greater public, that the two do work together. They are not in competition. And with that, I'll end. Thank you.